I can smell alcohol in your breath.
Officer, with all due respect, that is impossible. I haven't been drinking.
Don't lie to me! I'm a trained officer. I know the signs.
The sun was high and unforgiving, baking the asphalt of the quiet suburban street in Oak Haven. It was the kind of Tuesday afternoon where the only sounds were the distant hum of lawnmowers and the rhythmic hiss of sprinklers. Dr. Lena Kendrick drove a sensible late-model sedan, the kind of car that blended into the background, unremarkable and efficient. She was returning from a university lecture, her mind still replaying statistical models and ethical frameworks. The crack in her passenger-side taillight was a small, spider-webbed fracture, the result of a stray shopping cart in a crowded grocery store lot a week ago. It was on her list of things to fix, filed away under minor annoyances. She never imagined it would be the catalyst for the unraveling of a man's career and the exposing of a city's festering wound. The police cruiser appeared in her rearview mirror with the silent, sudden menace of a shark. It didn't speed or swerve, but simply materialized, closing the distance with a predatory patience. Lena checked her speedometer. 34 in a 35 zone. Her seatbelt was fastened. Her registration was current. She signaled a full 3 seconds before making a right turn onto her own street, a street lined with mature oak trees and houses that cost more than the city's entire annual budget for public parks. The cruiser followed. Then, the lights ignited, a strobing cascade of red and blue that felt obscene in the peaceful daylight. There was no siren, just the silent, flashing command. Lena pulled over immediately, her heart thrumming a low, familiar beat of anxiety that every black person in America knows. It was a conditioned response, a muscle memory of caution. She put the car in park, killed the engine, and placed both hands firmly on top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. Her window glided down smoothly. Officer Kyle Novak stepped out of his cruiser. He was in his late 30s, with a build that was beginning to soften around the middle, but was held in check by the stiff architecture of his uniform. His face was set in a mask of grim authority, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the placid blue sky. He didn't walk, he stalked. His approach to her vehicle was slow, deliberate, a piece of theater designed to communicate absolute control. His partner, a younger officer named Miller, remained by the passenger side of the cruiser, a silent observer. Novak stopped just behind her driver's side door, forcing her to crane her neck to see him. It was a classic power move. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any courtesy, "do you know why I pulled you over?" Lena kept her voice steady, modulated, the same tone she used to command a lecture hall of 200 students. "No, officer, I do not." "You have a fractured tail light," he announced as if he had just uncovered a major felony. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now!" The "now" was an exclamation point, sharp and unnecessary. "Of course, officer," Lena replied. "My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. May I have your permission to reach over and retrieve them?" Novak's silence was his answer. His eyes, hidden behind the sunglasses, scanned the interior of her car. The leather briefcase on the passenger seat, the single dry cleaning bag hanging in the back. His gaze lingered for a beat too long, searching for something that didn't belong, for a narrative he could construct. Lena moved with slow, telegraphed motions, retrieving the documents from the glove box and her license from her wallet. She handed them over, her fingers steady. He took the documents without a word, his eyes flicking from her face on the license to her face in the car, a subtle tick of comparison, of disbelief. He was studying her, but he wasn't seeing a university professor, a respected criminologist, a resident of the very neighborhood he was patrolling. He was seeing a black woman in a nice car in a rich neighborhood, and in his mind, the equation didn't add up. He held her license, tapping it against his knuckle. "Dr. Lena Kendrick," he read aloud, a faint sneer in his tone. "What kind of doctor are you?" "I have a PhD in criminology. I'm a professor at Northwood University," she said calmly. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Criminology, huh? So you should know all about following the law." He took a step back from the car, his posture shifting. He wasn't just a cop running a license anymore, he was an interrogator, and this quiet street was his chamber. The body camera on his chest was recording it all, its unblinking lens capturing the sunlight, the tension, and the slow, deliberate poisoning of a routine stop. The initial pretense of the taillight was already gone, replaced by something uglier, something simmering just beneath the surface of his uniform. He wasn't just enforcing the law, he was imposing his will. And Lena Kendrick, with her calm demeanor and her PhD, was a challenge to it. The air grew thick with unspoken words, and the silent, flashing lights continued their frantic dance, a warning that this was no longer about a cracked piece of plastic. It was about to become about everything else. Officer Novak took Lena's documents back to his cruiser, a calculated retreat designed to let the tension steep. He didn't run them immediately. He leaned against the push bar, speaking to his partner, Officer Miller, just out of range of Lena's hearing but well within sight. It was a performance. He wanted her to wait. He wanted her to feel the weight of his authority, the slow, grinding power of the state. Lena kept her hands on the wheel, her eyes forward, her breathing even. She had studied this. She had written papers on it. The psychology of police encounters, the subtle and overt ways in which power is asserted, often illegally. Knowing it academically was one thing. Living it was a cold, visceral reality. After nearly 10 minutes, an eternity in the charged silence of a traffic stop, Novak returned. He didn't hand her documents back. He held them like a poker hand, his thumb resting over her photograph. "Dr. Kendrick," he began again, his voice lower, more conspiratorial. "Where are you coming from today?" "I just left the university campus," she replied, her patience a thin, resilient thread. "I was teaching a class." "A class," he repeated, the words dripping with manufactured disbelief. "And what are you doing in this neighborhood?" The question was a classic tell, the implication clear. "You don't belong here." "I live here," Lena said, her voice remaining level. "My house is 4 blocks down on Chestnut Avenue." Novak's jaw tightened. It was not the answer he wanted. He wanted a reason to be suspicious, a crack in her story he could pry open. Her composure, her articulate responses, seemed only to fuel his aggression. He was a man who expected deference, perhaps even fear, and he was receiving none of it. "You seem nervous, ma'am," he said, leaning in closer to the window. It was a textbook lie, a foundational brick in the wall of probable cause he was trying to build. "I'm not nervous, officer. I'm simply waiting for you to return my license and registration so I can go home," she stated. "I can smell alcohol on your breath," he declared. The accusation hung in the air, so preposterous, so utterly fabricated that Lena felt a flash of genuine shock. She hadn't had a drink in days. "Officer, with all due respect, that is impossible. I have not been drinking." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, his voice rising. The mask of professional detachment was gone, replaced by raw, undisguised hostility. "I'm a trained officer. I know the signs. I asked you a simple question and you're getting defensive." "I'm not being defensive," Lena countered, her own voice firming, the academic replaced by a citizen asserting her rights. "I am telling you the truth. You have no reason to suspect me of anything." That was the mistake. Not in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of this man. She had challenged his authority directly. She had called his bluff. For Novak, this was no longer about a taillight or a fictitious smell of alcohol. It was a contest of wills, and he had no intention of losing. "You know, I'm getting a real attitude from you," he said, taking a step back and placing a hand on his belt near his service weapon. It wasn't a direct threat, but it was a clear signal. People who have nothing to hide don't act like this. They cooperate. "I have cooperated, officer," Lena said, her voice now edged with a cold fury she was struggling to contain. "I pulled over immediately. I provided all my documents. I have answered your questions truthfully. What you are doing now is harassment." The word harassment was the final trigger. Novak's face contorted. "That's it," he said, his voice hard as stone. "I'm done with this." He turned his head and spoke into the radio on his shoulder, his words loud and clear, meant for her to hear. "Dispatch, I need a second unit at my location. I've got a non-compliant female, possibly under the influence, refusing to cooperate." Every word was a calculated falsehood, captured in high definition by his own body camera. He had manufactured a crime out of thin air, escalated a routine stop into a confrontation, and twisted her calm assertion of rights into non-compliance. Officer Miller, who had been a silent statue by the cruiser, now began to move, sensing the shift. He hadn't intervened, hadn't questioned Novak's bizarre and aggressive line of questioning. His silence was its own form of consent. Lena watched Novak walk back towards her, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting a distorted image of her own face, a woman who had done nothing wrong, but was about to pay a price for a man's fragile ego and simmering rage. The foundation for her arrest was laid, built on a series of deliberate, malicious lies. The arrival of the second cruiser sealed the atmosphere. What had been a tense one-on-one encounter now felt like an occupation. Two more officers stepped out, their expressions neutral, but their presence amplifying Novak's authority. They didn't ask what was happening. They deferred to the officer who had made the call. The scene was now perfectly staged for Novak's final act. He approached Lena's window again, this time with Officer Miller flanking him. His entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer just an aggressive cop. He was a commander in control of a scene he himself had created. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you one more time to step out of the vehicle," Novak ordered. His voice was a low growl, the pretense of courtesy completely stripped away. "For what reason?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "You have my documents. You have run my name. I have done nothing illegal." "You are being detained for suspicion of driving under the influence," he said, the lie now formalized, given the weight of official police terminology, "and for obstructing an investigation. Now step out of the car or I will remove you." Lena knew this was a critical juncture. She could continue to argue, to assert her rights from inside the car, but she could see the cold, determined look on Novak's face. She saw the way the other officers positioned themselves. He wanted a physical confrontation. He was daring her to resist so he could justify what he was about to do next. The calculus was swift and brutal. A fight on the side of the road, even a verbal one, would only end one way. The narrative would be twisted. She would be portrayed as the aggressor. With a deep, steadying breath, she turned off the engine, unbuckled her seatbelt, and opened the door. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hands always visible. She stepped out onto the pavement, the afternoon sun feeling hot on her skin. She was a respected academic, a homeowner, a taxpayer, and she was standing on the side of the road, treated like a common criminal. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Novak commanded. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary," she said, her voice low but firm. "I will consent to a breathalyzer test right here. You will see that I have not been drinking." "It's too late for that," he snarled. "Your attitude has made this a whole lot worse for you." He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and spun her around to face the car. Before she could process it, he had twisted her arms behind her back, the metal of the handcuffs cold and sharp against her wrists. The first cuff clicked shut, then the second. The sound was sharp, metallic, and final. It was the sound of her rights being extinguished. Across the street, a woman watering her petunias paused, her hose going limp in her hand. A teenager on a bicycle slowed to a stop, his phone held loosely at his side. They were witnesses, but from their distance, all they could see were the optics. 4 white police officers, 1 black woman in handcuffs. Novak pushed her towards the back of his cruiser. "Watch your head," he muttered, a parody of protocol as he forced her into the back seat. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the small plastic and vinyl cage. The heat was stifling. She could see Novak through the thick plexiglass divider, his face flushed with a sense of victory. He hadn't uncovered a crime, he had committed an injustice. He had used the power of his badge not to serve and protect, but to bully and dominate a woman who refused to be intimidated. Officer Miller opened the driver's side of her car and began a cursory search, an illegal search, as she had been arrested for DUI, not a crime that would warrant a vehicle search without a warrant. He was looking for a confirmation of Novak's lie, an open container, anything to retroactively justify the arrest. He found nothing. A briefcase full of academic papers, a bottle of water, a half-eaten protein bar. Lena sat in the back of the cruiser, the handcuffs biting into her skin, and watched as her life was irrevocably altered. The cracked taillight was a forgotten prelude. This was about power, race, and a man whose ego was so fragile that he had to shatter a citizen's liberty to feel whole. The body cam on his chest was still rolling, a silent, objective witness to his every action, his every lie. He didn't know it yet, but he had just recorded the end of his own career. The ride to the West Haven Police Department was short and silent. Lena sat in the suffocating heat of the back seat, focusing on her breathing, trying to compartmentalize the rage and humiliation that was flooding her system. She was a criminologist. She understood the mechanics of the system she was now caught in. She knew that every word she said could be twisted, every reaction misconstrued. Silence was her only shield. Novak drove, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror, a smug satisfaction radiating from him. He had won. He had taken a powerful, articulate woman and reduced her to a prisoner in his car. The police station was a sterile beige building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Novak led her through a back entrance, his hand firmly on her elbow, parading her past a glass partition where civilian employees sat typing, their faces a mixture of curiosity and indifference. This was just another Tuesday, another arrest. They entered the booking area, a small windowless room with a concrete floor and a single metal bench bolted to the wall. The air was heavy and cold. Novak removed her handcuffs only to shackle one wrist to a metal loop on the bench. The humiliation was systematic, designed to strip away identity and autonomy piece by piece. "Empty your pockets," another officer, a burly sergeant with a tired face, instructed from behind a high desk. Lena placed the contents on the counter, her car keys, a pen, a tube of lip balm, and her wallet. The sergeant began cataloging them in a bored monotone. "Name? Dr. Lena Kendrick." "Just the name, ma'am." "Lena Kendrick." He typed her name into the computer. "Date of birth? Social Security?" The questions were rote, impersonal. She was no longer a person. She was a data entry. Novak stood off to the side, arms crossed, observing the process. His part in the drama was over for now. He had delivered his captive. He had asserted his dominance. Now the bureaucratic machinery would take over. He dictated his official report to another officer, his voice a low murmur, weaving his tapestry of lies into the official record. Subject was non-compliant, detected strong odor of alcoholic beverage, failed to follow lawful commands. Each phrase was a legal brick, cementing the fraudulent foundation of her arrest. The fingerprinting came next. The cold, sticky ink was rolled onto each of her fingers, her hand guided by the sergeant. She was instructed to press down, to roll her finger from side to side. Her unique individual identity was being captured, reduced to a series of whorls and loops, and filed away in a criminal database. Then came the mugshot. "Stand on the red line, look at the camera, turn to the right, look at the camera, turn to the left, look at the camera." The flash was blinding. 3 stark, clinical photographs that would forever exist in a file associated with this moment, this injustice. In the photos, her face was a mask of controlled composure, but her eyes held a fire that the camera could not extinguish. As she was being led from the booking room to a holding cell, the main doors of the station opened. A young man, the same teenager who had been on his bike, was standing there. He had followed them. His phone was raised, not overtly, but angled just enough. He was recording. He captured the image of Dr. Lena Kendrick, a distinguished professor in her professional attire, being led in handcuffs down a hallway by two officers. He caught the look of weary disgust on her face. He caught the smug indifference on Novak's. It was only 10 seconds of footage, but in the digital age, 10 seconds was more than enough. The teenager backed out of the station, his heart pounding. He had no idea who the woman was. He only knew that what he saw felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. He uploaded the clip to his social media with a simple, unadorned caption. "This is what's happening in Oakhaven right now." He added a hashtag, #Oakhaven PD. The heavy steel door of the holding cell clanged shut behind Lena, the sound echoing the finality of her situation. She was alone, in a cold, concrete box, stripped of her possessions, her dignity, and her freedom. But outside those walls, a tiny digital seed had been planted. And as Lena sat in the chilling silence, that seed was already beginning to sprout, watered by the outrage of strangers, ready to grow into a wildfire that would consume everything Kyle Novak had built. The internet moves at the speed of outrage, and the 10-second clip of Dr. Lena Kendrick being led through the Oakhaven Police Department was pure oxygen for a digital fire. The teenager's initial post, a small ember on a minor social media account, was screenshotted and shared by a local community activist. From there, it jumped to a regional Black Lives Matter chapters page, and then it hit the feed of a national political commentator with 2 million followers. The fire was lit. By 7 p.m., just 3 hours after Lena's arrest, #Justice for Lena Kendrick was trending on Twitter. The video, stripped of its original context and creator, was now everywhere. It was a perfect, horrifyingly familiar tableau. An elegant, composed black woman in handcuffs, flanked by impassive white officers. The internet didn't need any more information. It had seen this movie 1,000 times before. The narrative wrote itself in real time, in a torrent of furious comments, shares, and quote tweets. Pulled over for driving while black in a nice neighborhood. A classic. She looks more professional than the cops arresting her. Disgusting. Look at the smirk on that cop's face. He's enjoying this. Fire Novak. Someone, a digital sleuth with time and anger on their hands, ran the name Lena Kendrick through a search engine. Her university profile was the first result. A picture of her smiling, standing at a podium. Her impressive bio, PhD from a prestigious university, a list of published works on police reform and systemic bias, glowing testimonials from students. The irony was so potent, so staggering, that it acted as an accelerant. The story was no longer just about a random black woman. It was about Dr. Lena Kendrick, an expert on the very injustice she was now suffering. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Criminology professor arrested by police in her own neighborhood. Expert on police misconduct becomes latest victim. Local news affiliates, alerted by the social media storm, scrambled their reporters. They descended on the Oakhaven Police Department, their vans lining the street, satellite dishes aimed at the sky. The department's public information officer, a man unprepared for a national crisis, was bombarded with calls. He had no information. He could only offer the standard, infuriatingly vague statement. "We are aware of the video circulating on social media. The incident is currently under review." Under review. The two words were a transparent shield against a hurricane. The public wasn't waiting for a review. They had the video. They had the identity of the victim. By midnight, national news networks were leading their broadcasts with the story. They played the 10-second clip on a loop, a silent, damning piece of evidence. Pundits and legal analysts were brought in to dissect the scene, to speak in grave tones about the endemic nature of racial profiling in American law enforcement. Dr. Kendrick's university issued a statement expressing deep concern and attesting to her impeccable character and professional reputation. Her students organized a virtual walkout, their social media pages flooded with messages of support. The mayor's office, caught completely flat-footed, released a statement promising a full and transparent investigation. No one knew about the cracked taillight. No one knew about Officer Novak's fabricated smell of alcohol or his lies about non-compliance. All they had was the image, and the image was enough. The narrative was set in stone before the ink on Novak's false report was even dry. He wasn't just an officer who had made an arrest. He was now a symbol, a national villain, the living embodiment of a broken system. Inside her holding cell, Lena Kendrick had no idea that her private humiliation had become a public spectacle, that her name was being chanted at impromptu protests, that her face was on screens across the country. She only knew the cold of the concrete bench and the silence of her stolen freedom. The digital wildfire raged outside, and soon its heat would become personal, searing, and inescapable for the man who started it all. For Officer Kyle Novak, the day after the arrest began like any other. He woke up, drank his coffee, and scanned the local news on his phone. He saw a small article about a minor protest outside the station, but thought little of it. In his mind, he had done his job. He had put a mouthy, arrogant woman in her place. The report was filed. The system would do the rest. He was insulated, protected by the badge and the unwritten code of the blue wall. He was wrong. The first crack in his insulated world appeared around 9 a.m. His wife, Sarah, called him at the station, her voice trembling. "Kyle, what is going on? My phone is blowing up. People are sending me the most horrible messages." Novak's name hadn't been officially released by the department, but this was the digital age. The bystander's video was grainy, but not so grainy that his face was unrecognizable. Someone from his high school recognized him. They posted his name in a comment. From there, the doxing began. By noon, his home address was circulating on Twitter and Reddit forums. His wife's Facebook profile, with its cheerful pictures of their family vacations and their golden retriever, became a target. Photos of their 2 young children, initially shared with friends and family, were now being downloaded, reposted, and defaced with vile captions. The online mob, having judged and convicted him in the court of public opinion, had moved on to sentencing. And the sentence was the complete annihilation of his private life. "Your husband is a racist pig. I hope you know that. Tell your kids their father is a monster who gets off on harassing black women. We know where you live, Novak." The phone at his house began to ring incessantly. Strangers screaming obscenities, threats, slurs. A pizza delivery service called to confirm an order for 20 pizzas sent to his address, a classic harassment tactic. Sarah stopped answering. She drew the blinds, locked the doors, and sat in the living room, watching in horror as her husband's face was plastered across every news channel, always attached to words like racism, brutality, and abuse of power. At the station, the mood had turned funereal. The chief of police, a man who typically valued loyalty above all else, could barely look Novak in the eye. He was being inundated with calls from the mayor, from the city council, from state representatives. The pressure was immense and growing by the hour. "The body cam footage," the chief said, his voice strained. "We need to review it, immediately." Novak was pulled from duty and placed in a small, windowless office to write a supplemental report. But he could feel the walls closing in. The other officers, who yesterday would have slapped him on the back, now avoided his gaze. They had seen the video online. They had heard the roar of the crowd. The blue wall was designed to protect them from external threats, but this fire was too hot, too fast. Self-preservation was kicking in. At 2 p.m., the chief called Novak into his office. "You're on administrative leave, effective immediately," he said, not as a suggestion, but as a final non-negotiable order. "Go home. Don't talk to anyone. Don't post anything online. Let the department handle this." Going home was not a sanctuary. It was a prison. As Novak pulled into his driveway, he saw a news van parked across the street. A reporter shouted questions at him as he hurried inside. He slammed the door, the sound of his own name echoing from the television in the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her face pale. "They called from the school. she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "Someone posted a thread online. They're keeping the kids in the principal's office until one of us can pick them up. Kyle, what did you do?" He looked at his wife, at the fear and confusion in her eyes. He saw the life they had built, the quiet suburban comfort, now under siege. He had wanted to assert his power over one woman for a few minutes on the side of a quiet road. He never imagined the price would be this. He was no longer Officer Kyle Novak. He was a hashtag, a villain, a meme. The digital mob didn't care about due process. They didn't care about an investigation. They had their effigy, and they were burning it to the ground. The price of his infamy was being paid not just by him, but by everyone he loved, and the bill was still climbing. While the firestorm raged around Officer Novak and his family, Dr. Lena Kendrick was released from custody. The charge was resisting arrest without violence, a flimsy catch-all accusation they had substituted for the DUI, for which they had no evidence. Her attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed, had posted her bail and met her in the station's lobby, shielding her from the throng of reporters that had gathered outside. They escaped through a back exit, the shouts of the media a chaotic symphony in the background. For the next 24 hours, Lena stayed silent. She didn't give interviews. She didn't post on social media. She let the narrative churn on its own, fueled by the viral video and the public's raw emotion. Evelyn Reed advised caution. "The story is on your side right now," she said, "but it's incomplete. We need to control the next chapter." That next chapter began with a press conference held on the steps of the city courthouse the following morning. It was a calculated media event, designed to seize control of the narrative and pivot it in a direction no one could have anticipated. Evelyn Reed stood at the podium, a phalanx of microphones pointed at her like a firing squad. Dr. Kendrick stood beside her, silent and poised, her presence a powerful testament to the ordeal she had endured. "Yesterday, my client, Dr. Lena Kendrick, a respected academic and a pillar of this community, was subjected to a humiliating and unlawful arrest by an officer of the Oak Haven Police Department," Evelyn began, her voice ringing with conviction. "The video you have all seen tells a story of racial profiling and a gross abuse of power. And that story is true, but it is not the whole story." A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. They had expected a standard denunciation of police brutality, a call for the officer to be fired. This was something else. Evelyn paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. "What the public does not know," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, "is that for the past 18 months, Dr. Kendrick has been acting as a confidential informant and key witness for the United States Department of Justice." A collective gasp rippled through the press corps. Cameras flashed. Reporters began furiously typing into their phones. "Dr. Kendrick is a whistleblower," Evelyn declared, her voice rising again. "She has provided federal investigators with crucial evidence exposing a massive, multi-state financial fraud and corruption scheme orchestrated by the board of directors at Omnicorp, one of the largest government contractors in the country." The name Omnicorp landed like a bomb. They were a corporate behemoth, with deep political connections and a reputation for ruthless litigation. The story had just transcended a local police matter and exploded onto the national stage in an entirely new way. "My client is a protected federal witness," Evelyn stated, her eyes sweeping across the stunned faces of the reporters. "Her identity was meant to be confidential to protect her from retaliation. We have reason to believe that Officer Novak's actions were not a random act of racial bias. We are investigating whether this traffic stop, this baseless arrest, was a deliberate act of intimidation and witness tampering, orchestrated by forces far more powerful than a single police officer." The narrative wasn't just reframed, it was shattered. The story was no longer just about a bad cop. It was now potentially about a corporate conspiracy, a targeted attack on a federal whistleblower. The questions were immediate and dizzying. Did Omnicorp have connections to the Oak Haven PD? Was Officer Novak a pawn or a willing participant? Was this entire ordeal staged to discredit or silence Lena before she could testify? The FBI, which had remained silent on the matter, suddenly had no choice but to engage. Within an hour of the press conference, the local FBI field office released a terse, one-sentence statement. "We are aware of the allegations made this morning and are monitoring the situation." In the court of public opinion, Officer Novak had been a racist thug. Now, he was potentially something far more sinister, a hired goon for a corrupt corporation. For Novak, hiding in his home, this was a nightmare from which he could not wake. The mob that had wanted him fired for racism now wanted him investigated by the FBI for conspiracy. The story was no longer about his personal prejudice. It was about a crime that could lead to federal prison. The revelation that Dr. Kendrick was not just an innocent victim, but a different kind of witness, had changed everything. The FBI's involvement changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. What had been a local internal affairs matter, likely to be slow-walked and sanitized for public consumption, was now under a federal microscope. The Oak Haven Police Department was no longer just dealing with angry protesters and a public relations crisis. They were dealing with federal agents who could subpoena records, compel testimony, and expose institutional rot. The pressure was immense. The first thing the IA investigators did, now with a new sense of urgency, was pull Officer Kyle Novak's complete personnel file. Not the curated version presented at performance reviews, but the entire unvarnished history of his 9 years on the force. What they found was not the record of a model cop. It was a chronicle of red flags that had been consistently ignored, downplayed, or dismissed. There were 12 citizen complaints filed against Novak. 12. In a department where the average officer might get 1 or 2 in a career, this was an astronomical number. The pattern was disturbingly consistent. 8 of the 12 complaints were from Black or Hispanic drivers, all pulled over for minor ticky-tack infractions. A license plate light out, rolling through a stop sign, driving 2 miles over the speed limit. The language in the complaints was eerily similar to Dr. Kendrick's experience. The officer was immediately hostile and aggressive. He accused me of being on drugs with no evidence. He seemed to be looking for a confrontation. He escalated the situation for no reason. In 3 of those cases, the drivers alleged that Novak had conducted an illegal search of their vehicle after they refused to consent. But in every single one of those 12 cases, the outcome was the same. Complaint unfounded, or officer exonerated. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to. It protected its own. Novak's word, as a sworn officer of the law, was given more weight than that of the citizens he had sworn to protect. His reports were always clean, professional, and written in a way that justified his actions, painting the citizen as argumentative or uncooperative. Without body cam footage, which the department had only made mandatory in the last 2 years, it was his word against theirs, and his word always won. The file also contained 2 formal reprimands for conduct unbecoming an officer, both stemming from off-duty incidents. One was a road rage altercation where Novak had allegedly brandished his badge to intimidate another driver. The other was a heated, verbally abusive argument with a youth sports referee at his son's soccer game. He was a powder keg, a man with a clear problem with authority, unless it was his own. He was a bully who used his badge as a shield and a weapon. The department knew it. The paper trail was undeniable. They hadn't just failed to discipline him, they had actively enabled him, allowing him to remain on the streets, a ticking time bomb. The FBI liaison working with the IA investigators was particularly interested in Novak's financial records. A federal subpoena was issued for his bank accounts, credit card statements, and any large cash transactions over the past year. They were looking for the connection, the smoking gun that would link him to Omnicorp. As the IA report began to take shape, a grim picture emerged. Kyle Novak was not an aberration. He was a product of a system that tolerated and even tacitly encouraged his behavior. The department had had 12 opportunities to intervene, to retrain him, to discipline him, or to fire him. They had done nothing, and their failure to act had led directly to the arrest of Dr. Lena Kendrick. The mounting evidence of Novak's past created a seismic shift within the police department. The narrative of a good cop having a bad day was no longer tenable. They had a rogue officer with a long, documented history of misconduct on their hands. And now, because that officer had picked the wrong target, a highly intelligent, legally savvy federal whistleblower, the department's own history of negligence was about to be exposed to the world. The blue wall wasn't just cracking, it was beginning to crumble. The federal investigation into a potential link between Officer Novak and Omnicorp proceeded with chilling efficiency, but it quickly ran into a series of frustrating dead ends. The FBI agents assigned to the case were some of the best, experts in tracing dark money and uncovering corporate malfeasance. They tore through Novak's life with a fine-toothed comb, searching for any thread, however thin, that might connect him to the corporate giant. His financial records were the first place they looked. They found the standard debts of a man living slightly beyond his means. A mortgage, 2 car payments, a significant amount of credit card debt. But there were no sudden, unexplained cash deposits, no wire transfers from offshore accounts, no shell corporations. He hadn't recently paid off a large loan or bought a luxury item inconsistent with his salary. From a financial perspective, he was clean. Next, they analyzed his digital footprint. They subpoenaed his phone records, his text messages, his emails, and his social media activity. They found a man who was opinionated and often abrasive online, with a history of engaging in heated political arguments. He followed several Blue Lives Matter and other pro-police accounts and had liked posts that were critical of the Black Lives Matter movement. He was a man with clear biases, but there was no digital communication with anyone even remotely connected to Omnicorp. No burner phones were found in his home or his patrol car. No encrypted messaging apps on his devices. The investigators then turned their focus to Omnicorp's side. They interviewed executives, security consultants, and board members. The company's high-priced lawyers were present at every interview, and the answers were uniform, polished, and unhelpful. No one had ever heard of Officer Kyle Novak. They denied any knowledge of Dr. Kendrick's whistleblower status prior to her attorney's press conference. They portrayed Omnicorp as the victim of a baseless and defamatory accusation. The lack of a direct link was maddening. It left the investigators with 2 equally terrifying possibilities. The first was the conspiracy theory, that Omnicorp was so sophisticated, so skilled at corporate espionage, that they had found a way to activate Novak through an untraceable cutout, a third party who could deliver cash or a message without leaving a digital or financial trace. Perhaps they had identified him through his complaint history as a cop who was easily provoked, especially in encounters with minorities, and simply steered him in Lena's direction, knowing his own prejudice would do the rest. It was a plausible theory, but without evidence it was just that, a theory. The second possibility was in some ways even more disturbing. It was the theory of catastrophic coincidence, that on that particular Tuesday afternoon, the volatile, racist, and power-hungry Officer Kyle Novak, a time bomb created by a negligent police department, had randomly crossed paths with the one person in the city whose arrest would cause the maximum possible damage. It meant that the system was so broken, so rife with unaccountable officers like Novak, that it was statistically inevitable that one of them would eventually stumble into a federal investigation. There was no conspiracy, just a perfect storm of individual malice and systemic failure. This second scenario was terrifying because it couldn't be prosecuted. You could prosecute a conspiracy. You could indict corporate executives and dirty cops. But you couldn't put a broken system on trial. You couldn't jail a coincidence. The FBI leaned towards the second theory. It was simpler, and it fit the evidence they had, or rather, the evidence they lacked. Novak wasn't a hired gun. He was just a bad cop who had finally hit a landmine. For the Oak Haven Police Department and the city, this was a small relief. A rogue officer was a containable problem. A department implicated in a federal witness tampering scheme was an existential threat. But for Lena Kendrick and her attorney, the lack of a provable link didn't matter. The possibility that it was a targeted attack was enough. It added a powerful, explosive element to their impending civil suit. They didn't need to prove conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, as the FBI would. In a civil case, they just needed to convince a jury that it was plausible. The question of coincidence or conspiracy would now be fought not by federal agents in secret, but by lawyers in a very public, very high-stakes courtroom battle. With the FBI investigation into a conspiracy stalled and the internal affairs report on Novak's misconduct gathering dust on the police chief's desk, Evelyn Reed made her move. She filed a civil rights lawsuit in federal court. The defendants were Officer Kyle Novak, personally, and the city of Oakhaven. The legal filing was a masterpiece of controlled fury, a 50-page document that laid out the case with devastating precision. The lawsuit alleged a litany of violations: false arrest, malicious prosecution, illegal search and seizure, and a violation of Dr. Kendrick's First Amendment rights by retaliating against her for questioning Novak's authority. But the core of the lawsuit was a powerful Monell claim against the city itself. This legal argument was the kill shot. It contended that the city had a custom or policy of failing to train, supervise, and discipline its officers, thereby creating an environment where a constitutional violation like the one against Dr. Kendrick was not just possible, but inevitable. Novak's sordid history of 12 prior complaints was Exhibit A. Each dismissed complaint was presented as another brick in the wall of the city's indifference. The lawsuit argued that the city knew, or should have known, that Novak was a liability, a danger to the public, and that their repeated failure to act made them directly responsible for his actions on the day of Lena's arrest. And then there was the demand for damages. Evelyn Reed didn't ask for a token amount. She asked for $8 million. $2 million in compensatory damages for the emotional distress, reputational harm, and violation of rights Lena had suffered, and $6 million in punitive damages, designed not to compensate Lena, but to punish Novak and, more importantly, the city. The number was deliberately shocking. It was designed to make headlines, to show that they were not looking for a quick, quiet settlement. They were looking for a reckoning. The filing of the lawsuit sent a fresh shockwave through the city. The $8 million figure was splashed across every news outlet. For the taxpayers of Oakhaven, this was no longer an abstract story about police misconduct. It was a number, a potential financial blow that would affect city services, property taxes, and the city's bond rating. The pressure on the mayor and the city council intensified. The city's legal department, a team of overworked and under-resourced attorneys, knew they were in trouble. They initially responded with a boilerplate defense, denying all allegations and asserting that Novak was a good officer who had acted in good faith. It was a weak pro forma response, and everyone knew it. Evelyn Reed immediately began the discovery process, demanding access to every document related to Novak's career: his training records, his performance evaluations, every email ever sent about him between supervisors, and the complete unredacted files for all 12 prior complaints. She also filed a motion to compel the release of the full, unedited body camera footage from Novak's encounter with Dr. Kendrick. The city's attorneys fought back, filing motions to delay, to limit the scope of discovery. They tried to argue that the body cam footage was part of an ongoing internal investigation and should remain confidential. But the federal judge assigned to the case was a no-nonsense appointee who had seen these tactics before. He granted Evelyn's motion. The city was ordered to turn over the footage within 10 days. The clock was ticking. The city was now facing a public trial where their dirtiest laundry, the pattern of abuse, the ignored warnings, the systemic negligence, was about to be aired for the world to see. The lawsuit wasn't just about money anymore. It was about accountability. Evelyn Reed was putting the entire culture of the Oakhaven Police Department on trial, and the star witness against them was going to be their own officer's body camera. The $8 million demand was the price of admission to a show the city was desperate to avoid. The city's legal team knew the body camera footage was bad. What they didn't appreciate until they sat down to watch the full 37-minute recording was that it was an extinction-level event for their case. It was not just evidence. It was a frame-by-frame, second-by-second dismantling of Officer Novak's entire defense. Under immense pressure from the court order and the public, the city made a calculated decision: release the footage to the media before Evelyn Reed could. It was a weak attempt to control the narrative, to get ahead of the story. The move backfired spectacularly. The video file was released to a consortium of news outlets at 3 p.m. on a Friday. By 3:05, it was the only story that mattered. The footage began not with aggression, but with a chillingly mundane view of Novak's dashboard as he drove. Then he saw Dr. Kendrick's car. The audio captured him muttering to his partner Miller, "Look at this one. Bet she's lost." It was the genesis of the stop, a casual, prejudiced assumption. Then came the stop itself. The camera's unblinking eye recorded everything with damning clarity. It captured Dr. Kendrick's calm, respectful tone. It captured her clear, articulate answers. And it captured Novak's escalating hostility in high-fidelity audio. The most damning moment came when Novak accused her of being nervous. The camera showed a woman who was the exact opposite, poised, controlled, and steady. The lie was exposed in real time. Then came the accusation of smelling alcohol. The microphone was sensitive enough to pick up the rustle of his uniform, the sound of passing cars, the chirping of birds. What it did not pick up was any slurring in Dr. Kendrick's speech, any sign of intoxication. It only picked up Novak's sharp, baseless accusation and her firm, clear denial. The footage made him not just a liar, but a clumsy one. The audio of his call for backup was even more devastating. "I've got a non-compliant female, possibly under the influence," his voice crackled. The video, however, showed Dr. Kendrick sitting in her car with her hands on the steering wheel, the very picture of compliance. The disconnect between what he said and what the camera saw was absolute. The video continued into the arrest. It showed Lena stepping out of the car slowly, her hands visible. It recorded her offer to take a breathalyzer test. And it recorded Novak's sneering dismissal. "It's too late for that. Your attitude has made this a whole lot worse for you." It was a confession, captured on his own device. He wasn't arresting her for a crime, he was punishing her for her attitude, for her refusal to cower. The footage released to the public was a gut punch. The 10-second viral clip of her being led away had created outrage. This full, unedited video created a cold, hard certainty. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for interpretation. Officer Kyle Novak had, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, manufactured a crime and arrested an innocent woman because he felt disrespected. The public reaction was swift and volcanic. The protesters who had gathered outside the police station were now joined by hundreds more citizens, black and white, their anger solidified by the irrefutable proof. The mayor, who had been hiding behind promises of an investigation, was now forced to hold an emergency press conference. "The video is deeply disturbing," he said, his face ashen. "Officer Novak's actions are inexcusable and do not reflect the values of this city or our police department." It was too little too late. The unblinking eye of the body camera had not only destroyed Novak's career, it had exposed the city's complicity. They had employed this man for 9 years. They had dismissed 12 complaints against him. The footage wasn't just an indictment of one officer, it was an indictment of the entire system that had allowed him to flourish. For the city's attorneys, the case was no longer about winning. It was about surviving. The release of the body camera footage had an immediate and catastrophic effect on Officer Novak's support system. The blue wall of silence, that unspoken code of solidarity among police officers, is built on a foundation of ambiguity. It thrives in the gray areas of he said, she said, and relies on the benefit of the doubt given to an officer's sworn testimony. Novak's body cam had obliterated any ambiguity. The evidence was not just clear, it was absolute. The Oakhaven Police Union, which had initially issued a standard statement urging the public to reserve judgment until all the facts are known, fell silent. Behind the scenes, the union's president and its attorneys were in crisis mode. They watched the video and knew the truth. Novak was indefensible. Supporting him now would be political suicide, chaining the entire union to a man who had so flagrantly and obviously abused his power. The political capital they would have to spend to defend him would be immense, and they would still lose. The first sign of the wall's collapse came in a leaked email from the union president to its members. The recent incident involving Officer Novak is deeply concerning, it read. We support due process for all our officers, but we also must maintain the trust of the community. Actions that violate policy and erode that trust cannot and will not be condoned. The language was careful, but the message was clear. Novak was on his own. His isolation became starkly apparent during his deposition for the civil lawsuit. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room in a downtown law office. Novak sat at one end of a long mahogany table, flanked by a union-appointed lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Across from him sat Evelyn Reed, and next to her, Dr. Lena Kendrick, a silent, powerful presence. Evelyn began calmly, asking Novak to recount the events of the traffic stop. Novak, coached by his lawyer, recited the version of events from his police report. He used police jargon, spoke in a confident monotone, and painted himself as a professional officer dealing with a difficult, uncooperative subject. He lied with the practiced ease of a man who had done it many times before. Then, Evelyn placed a laptop on the table and turned it to face him. "Officer Novak," she said, her voice like ice, "I'm now going to play your body camera footage from that day. I'd like you to tell me at each point how the video aligns with your sworn testimony." She pressed play. The video started, the audio filling the silent room. Evelyn paused it after Novak's first line of questioning. "Officer, in your report you stated the driver seemed excessively nervous. Does Dr. Kendrick appear excessively nervous to you in this video?" Novak shifted in his chair. Her hands were tight on the wheel. "It's a sign of tension." "Or is it the sign of a citizen following the recommended procedure during a traffic stop to ensure officer safety?" Evelyn countered. She pressed play again, stopping at the moment he claimed to smell alcohol. "Officer, can you point to the exact moment you detected this odor? Was there a change in her speech? Did she stumble over her words?" "You can't see a smell on video," Novak mumbled, his confidence beginning to crack. Evelyn continued relentlessly. She played the clip of him calling for backup, of him claiming Lena was non-compliant. "Officer, please describe for me the actions Dr. Kendrick is taking in this video that you would define as non-compliant." Novak stared at the screen, at the image of Lena sitting perfectly still in her car. He had no answer. The camera was an unimpeachable witness. It contradicted his every statement, exposed his every lie. His face, once smug and authoritative, was now pale with sweat. His lawyer occasionally objected, but the objections were weak, half-hearted. He knew it was a lost cause. The final blow came when Evelyn played the audio of his arrest. "Your attitude has made this a whole lot worse for you." "Officer Novak," Evelyn asked, her voice quiet but sharp as a razor. "Is it the policy of the Oakhaven Police Department to arrest citizens for their attitude?" He finally broke. I felt the situation was escalating," he stammered. "I had to maintain control of the scene." "Or did you, Officer Novak, lose control of your temper and arrest a woman for daring to question your authority?" Novak glared at her, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He was broken. The video had stripped him of his lies, his justifications, and his authority. The blue wall had not just cracked, it had completely disintegrated, leaving him exposed, alone, and utterly defeated in a silent conference room, with the only sound being the hum of the laptop that had destroyed him. The deposition was the breaking point for the city of Oakhaven. Novak's disastrous, self-immolating testimony was transcribed and sent to the city's legal department. When combined with the public relations nightmare of the body cam video and the mountain of evidence from Novak's personnel file, the conclusion was inescapable. They could not win this lawsuit. Going to trial was no longer an option. It would be a public crucifixion. Evelyn Reed would play the body cam footage for the jury on a massive screen. She would put the 12 previous complainants on the stand to testify about Novak's pattern of abuse. She would put the police chief on the stand and force him to explain why Novak was still employed after so many red flags. The trial would dominate the news for weeks, costing the city millions in legal fees and inflicting irreparable damage on its reputation. And at the end of it all, a jury, enraged by what they had seen and heard, would almost certainly award Dr. Kendrick the full $8 million and possibly more. The city council held an emergency closed-door session with their lead attorneys. The mood was grim. The conversation was not about justice or morality. It was about damage control. It was a cold, desperate calculation of risk and financial exposure. "We have to settle," the city's lead attorney stated flatly. "There is no viable defense strategy. Every single piece of evidence is against us." A council member, a fiscal conservative who hated the idea of a massive payout, pushed back. $8 million? That's an astronomical sum. It'll gut the city's budget. Can't we fight it? Argue the amount down. "And what's our argument?" the attorney retorted. "That the video isn't as bad as it looks? That Novak's dozen prior complaints are just a coincidence? The jury will see this as a pattern of institutional arrogance. They will punish us. $8 million might be the cheap way out. A jury could give her 10, 12. They could add on attorney's fees that would run into the 7 figures. A trial is a blank check, and we're the ones who will have to pay it." The mayor, who had been silent, finally spoke. "What are the terms? What does their lawyer want?" "She wants the money," the attorney said. "But that's not all she wants. The settlement will have to be public, no confidentiality clause. And she's demanding, as a non-negotiable condition, Officer Novak's immediate and permanent resignation from the Oak Haven Police Department." The room was silent. Forcing an officer to resign as part of a settlement was a drastic step. It was an admission of guilt, a public capitulation. But they all knew it was the only way. Getting Novak off the force was the only way to signal to the public that they were taking this seriously. It was a sacrificial offering to appease the angry masses. The calculation was brutal. Paying the $8 million would be painful. It would mean budget cuts, delayed projects, and angry taxpayers. But it would be a finite pain. It would stop the bleeding. A trial would be an ongoing hemorrhage with no end in sight. Settling was the only rational choice. It was a business decision. They weren't settling because it was the right thing to do. They were settling because it was the cheapest, most efficient way to make the problem go away. The next day, the city's attorneys contacted Evelyn Reed. "The city is prepared to discuss a settlement," they said. The fight wasn't over, but the war was. All that was left was to negotiate the terms of surrender. The city had made its desperate calculation, choosing a guaranteed financial hit over a public spectacle of its own failures. They were ready to write a very large check to buy back their peace, even if they knew they hadn't earned it. The settlement negotiations were swift and one-sided. Evelyn Reed held all the cards, and the city knew it. They tried to haggle on the dollar amount, floating offers of $4 million, then $5 million. Evelyn didn't even counter. She simply stated, "My client's demand is $8 million. We will see you in court." The city's bluff was called. They folded within 24 hours. $8 million it was. The sticking point, however, was the fate of Kyle Novak. The city wanted him to resign quietly. The police union, in a last-ditch effort to save some face, argued that he should be allowed to resign for personal reasons and keep his pension. Evelyn's response was unequivocal. "Absolutely not," she told the city's attorneys over the phone, her voice leaving no room for debate. "The terms are his immediate termination for cause, based on the findings of the internal affairs investigation. He will not be permitted to resign, and he will forfeit his pension. He is not a victim here. He is the cause. This is not negotiable. She was drawing a line in the sand. This wasn't just about money for Dr. Kendrick. It was about ensuring that Kyle Novak could never again wear a badge and carry a gun in any jurisdiction. A resignation would allow him to apply to another police department, his record scrubbed clean. A termination for cause would be a permanent black mark, a scarlet letter in the world of law enforcement. The city, desperate to finalize the deal, put immense pressure on the police union. Their message was simple. Either you convince Novak to accept these terms, or the city goes to trial, and the fallout for the entire department will be catastrophic. The union, seeing its own survival at stake, abandoned its last defense of Novak. A union representative met with Novak and his lawyer. He laid out the grim reality. "They're going to fire you, Kyle," the rep said, his tone heavy. "The city's insurance won't cover the settlement if you're still an employee. If you fight the termination, they'll drag it out and you'll lose anyway. This is the deal. You accept the termination, and the civil suit against you personally is dropped. You refuse, and you're on your own. You could be on the hook for millions in damages that you'll spend the rest of your life paying off." Novak sat there, a broken man. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed bitterness. He had been so certain of his power, of the system's protection. Now, that same system was chewing him up and spitting him out to save itself. He saw the contempt in the union rep's eyes. He was no longer a brother in blue. He was a liability, a stain to be removed. He signed the paperwork. A 2-sentence letter acknowledging his termination for violations of department policy and conduct unbecoming an officer. Just like that, his 9-year career was over. He turned in his badge, his service weapon, and his uniform. He cleaned out his locker, the contents, a spare set of clothes, a few old photos, a coffee mug, feeling like relics from another man's life. No one said goodbye. The other officers in the locker room suddenly found reasons to be busy, to look at their phones, to walk in the other direction. He was a pariah. His presence was a reminder of their own vulnerability, of how quickly a career could be extinguished. He walked out of the West Haven Police Department for the last time, not as an officer, but as a disgraced civilian. He stepped out into the afternoon sun, the same sun that had been shining on the day he pulled over Dr. Kendrick. He was now just Kyle Novak, a 38-year-old unemployed man with a family to support, a house he could no longer afford, and a name that was synonymous with racism and police brutality. The city issued a press release announcing the $8 million settlement and the termination of Officer Novak. For the public, it was a victory. For the city, it was a costly but necessary amputation. For Kyle Novak, it was the quiet, ignominious end. There was no trial, no public apology, just a signature on a piece of paper that erased his career and marked the final, irreversible consequence of a rage he could not control. The $8 million settlement was a legal victory, a stunning public vindication. The news cycle celebrated it as a triumph of justice. Dr. Lena Kendrick was hailed as a hero, a courageous woman who had stood up to a corrupt system and won. She was invited onto national news programs, profiled in major magazines, and offered a book deal. She became a symbol. But being a symbol is a heavy, dehumanizing burden. In the quiet months that followed the settlement, Lena found that her life was no longer her own. When she walked into a room, she wasn't seen as Dr. Kendrick, the criminologist. She was seen as Lena Kendrick, the victim, the activist, the woman who took down a racist cop. Her work, her research, her identity were all subsumed by this one traumatic event. Strangers would stop her in the grocery store, some to offer words of support, others to stare with a kind of morbid curiosity, as if she were a living exhibit in a museum of social injustice. Her academic work suffered. She found it difficult to concentrate, to lose herself in the comfort of data and theory as she once had. The trauma of the arrest lingered. The memory of the cold handcuffs, the clang of the cell door, the casual cruelty in Novak's eyes, These were ghosts that haunted her quiet moments. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. She had been forced to expose the most humiliating moments of her life to the world to achieve it, her privacy sacrificed at the altar of public opinion. There was also a lingering fear. The conspiracy connecting Novak to Omnicorp was never proven, but the question remained, a dark cloud on the horizon. Omnicorp was still a powerful entity. Her whistleblower case was still pending, and her testimony would be more crucial than ever. The $8 million from the city felt less like a victory prize and more like combat pay for a war that was far from over. She had security systems installed in her home. She looked over her shoulder in parking lots. The settlement had ended her battle with Kyle Novak, but it had not ended her fear of the powerful, faceless forces he may have represented. She grappled with the complex legacy of her own story. She knew it was important. She knew it had sparked a vital conversation in Oakhaven and beyond. The city had initiated a series of police reforms in the wake of the scandal, implementing new de-escalation training and creating a civilian oversight board. Her case had been a catalyst for real change, but the personal cost was immense. She turned down the talk shows and the book deal. She tried to retreat back into the quiet, intellectual life she had built. She wanted to be a professor again, not a symbol. She poured her energy into her students, into her research, her lectures now imbued with a new, hard-won authority. When she spoke about systemic bias, she was no longer just citing studies. She was citing her own life. One evening, her lawyer, Evelyn Reed, came to her house to discuss the upcoming Omnicorp trial. "You know," Evelyn said, looking at her, "most people would be celebrating. You did something extraordinary." Lena looked out the window at the quiet street, the same street where it had all begun. "I didn't want to be extraordinary," she said softly. "I just wanted to drive home." The aftermath of being a viral symbol was not a victory parade. It was a quiet, lonely process of trying to piece her life back together, of trying to reclaim her own narrative from the headlines. The world saw her as a success story, a triumphant warrior for justice, but she knew the truth. She was a survivor, left to navigate the wreckage of a battle she never asked to fight, forever defined by the worst day of her life. In the end, the story of Dr. Lena Kendrick and Kyle Novak faded from the national consciousness, as all such stories do. It was replaced by the next outrage, the next viral video, the next symbol of a fractured society. Oakhaven paid the settlement, the money transferred electronically, a sterile and anticlimactic end to a saga born of raw emotion. The new police reforms were implemented, and the city's leaders spoke of healing and moving forward. But a quiet, uncomfortable question lingered in the air, a question that no press conference or settlement could truly answer. Was this justice? On the surface, it looked like it. A bad cop was off the street. A victim was compensated handsomely. A city was forced to reform. The system, it seemed, had worked. It had identified a problem, punished the perpetrator, and corrected its course. But this neat conclusion ignored the terrifying fragility of the entire process. Justice had only been possible because of a perfect storm of improbable circumstances. It required the victim to be Dr. Lena Kendrick, impeccably credentialed, articulate, and calm under unimaginable pressure. It required the presence of a teenager with a smartphone to capture the initial, crucial footage. It required an attorney with the skill and tenacity of Evelyn Reed, and most disturbingly, it required the spectacular, almost theatrical villainy of Officer Kyle Novak, whose lies were so blatant and whose prejudice was so transparent on his own body camera that his guilt was undeniable. The system hadn't worked because it was just. It had worked because Kyle Novak had made it impossible for it to fail. He had handed the prosecution a perfect case, gift-wrapped in his own arrogance. This left behind a chilling counter-narrative. What if the victim hadn't been a PhD criminologist? What if she had been a young woman with a prior misdemeanor, someone the system could easily discredit? What if she had panicked and yelled back at Novak, fulfilling his narrative of the non-compliant suspect? What if there had been no bystander video, no body camera? The 12 dismissed complaints against Novak provided the grim answer. Without the perfect victim and the perfect evidence, the system would have done what it had always done. It would have believed the cop. It would have protected its own. Dr. Kendrick's story would have become just another unfounded complaint in a file cabinet, another quiet injustice in a system full of them. The $8 million settlement was not a sign of the system's strength, but a measure of its failure. It was the price of negligence, the cost of ignoring a dozen warnings. It was a payout to make a problem disappear, not a genuine act of atonement. The city cut out a cancerous tumor in Kyle Novak, but it did little to treat the underlying disease of a culture that had allowed that tumor to grow for 9 years. Justice, in this fractured system, was not a guarantee. It was a lottery, and Lena Kendrick had just happened to hold the winning ticket. The real tragedy were the countless others who pulled over every day, who didn't have her resources, her composure, or her luck, and whose stories were never told. It's easy to look at Kyle Novak and see only a monster, a one-dimensional villain in a story of black and white. But the most dangerous monsters are the ones who believe they are the heroes. Novak's rage didn't spring from a vacuum. It likely grew from a seed of insecurity, a feeling of being overlooked in a world that celebrated credentials and intellect, things he may have felt he lacked. He wrapped himself in the authority of his uniform, and the power it gave him became a balm for a fragile ego. Doctor Lena Kendrick, with her Ph.D., her articulate confidence, and her presence in a neighborhood he felt she didn't belong in, was not just a driver to him. She was an affront to his entire sense of self. His aggression wasn't just about control. It was a desperate attempt to feel significant by diminishing someone he perceived as superior. The traffic stop was his stage, and the arrest was his applause line, a performance for an audience of one, himself. What if Lena had acted differently? What if she had been more submissive, apologized for the taillight she didn't break, and absorbed his hostility with a fearful deference? Perhaps he would have let her go with a ticket, his ego satisfied. But that places the burden of a police officer's professionalism onto the citizen, a fundamentally unjust proposition. What if she had argued more fiercely? He would have used it as a justification for a more violent arrest, and the narrative might have shifted. The chilling truth is, there was likely no right way for her to behave. The outcome was preordained the moment he saw her, because the conflict was not about her actions, but about his own internal deficiencies. Her best defense wasn't on the side of that road. It was the systemic change that should have removed him from the force long before their paths ever crossed. This story is a stark reminder that justice should not depend on a viral video or a victim's flawless composure. Accountability is not a multi-million-dollar settlement paid by taxpayers. It's a culture of integrity that proactively removes bad actors before they can cause harm. We built a system where the unblinking eye of a camera has become a more trusted arbiter of truth than the word of a citizen or the sworn oath of an officer. And while that technology can be a powerful tool for transparency, its necessity is an admission of a deeper failure of human trust and institutional integrity. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what does true accountability look like in our communities? And how many other Kyle Novaks are still on the street, their stories waiting for a camera to press record? Thank you for watching. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories.